we wanted to hop on with Katie Emerson. Katie is, if you don't know, Katie is an RD, a certified sports nutritionist, and also the manager of scientific affairs at Nutrition 21. Hi, Katie. Thanks for jumping on with us.
Hi, Todd. Hi, Elise.
Hi, Katie. How are
Happy to
you?
join.
Yeah. Always happy to talk to you. We've got something special to talk about here today, and it's related a lot to what we've been working on in the last quarter with Move Nutrition. So this all kind of comes together in a cool way. But the ISSN just released, I believe it was last week, this position stand on the nutritional concerns of the female athlete. So we wanted to get you on, given your qualifications, and this is a topic you've talked about before, and you will be talking about coming up here at the ISSN conference. We want to get your quick take on what this all means. So with that, I'll let you jump in, Elise.
Yeah, I mean, we actually just covered a lot in our last quarterly on the lack of research in women in sports nutrition. So I think this stand comes at a really good time for us to talk about and connect that to the lack of research. But before we kind of dive into what the position stand that we're talking about here is today, what tell us what is a position stand from the ISSN, Katie? They do put these out pretty often, so I think it would be great for us to understand like the top line overview of what it means when they do put out these position stands.
Yeah, it's a great question. When I first joined kind of the ISSN community, I was a student. And for me, these position stance gave me the opportunity to learn a very specific topic in a one article brief. So you think of it as almost like a meta analysis where there's a huge literature search being done on this topic and then they bring it all in. But the difference with ISSN doing this is if you look at the authors that are on these papers, on these position stands, they have alone individually years of personal experience in this population, whether it's directly working with female athletes or doing research themselves. So if you take the collective knowledge of the authors without even doing a literature search from outside sources, you are going to learn so much about this topic. So being able to have that group of individuals with this expertise and having them construct this literature search for you, this paper is gold because you can trust it. It's reliable and is really well written. Of course, there's some topics in there. If you're not science background driven, you may have to do some Google searches on like what these mean. But overall, I think they did a great job capturing the essence of sports and women and why it's important for us, especially as dietitians, when we're working with these female athletes, how to work with them, especially when you're talking about lifestyle changes. So I love that this paper came out. I agree. This is perfect timing because there is a huge movement with female sports. If you haven't read the article, I highly recommend it. It is lengthy, but it's really informative.
And
Yeah,
I love these stands too because even when I go in and I do like my own research search on papers, sometimes I don't even know at a point, was this done, you know, in a good research type of way, right? And when I read these stands, I feel so confident because of the authors, because of who's looking up and following up and looking at these research studies. I feel so good about the information that's coming out in these stands from ISSN. So I think
Yeah,
you made a great point
When
there.
I spoke to Jose Antonio about it, he said that the reason that he does this is because it's basically a reflection of the totality of scientific evidence to date. So you know that this is the most recent current research, and it allows him, as a co-founder of ISSN, to promote the latest science. So it shows their commitment to doing their due diligence for the community. So this is just a way for them to show that they are trying to stay abreast to the new research and making it easier for us so we don't have to do our own literature search.
Sure.
yeah, that makes sense. So let's dive into some of the details. As we all know, there are a lot of considerations when we're talking about sports nutrition for females, and that's athletes, but then also people who are trying to live an active lifestyle across that spectrum. To name a few, there's reproductive age considerations, right? There's like different hormone profiles. There's the whole topic of energy availability. Like with all of that consideration, what are some of the things that people can take away, right? There's all of the research, there are all the studies, and I love how the paper goes through and breaks down different areas. It's not just this blanket, hey, you should do this or that. It really dives in. So for the fact that it's this summary that gathers all this research together, it still does take this detailed look at different components. Having said that, there's a ton in there, but can you just give us a couple of the highlights?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. It's you're talking about so many different phases through life. When you look at age in general, without even the hormones fluctuations, like you're going to have different recommendations for energy, fat, carb metabolism, hydration, electrolyte balance. So I think the best overview is what I would tell any athlete or even an active nutrition user. So you don't have to be an athlete because you're still experiencing these changes. Is to track your hormones. And there are tons of phone apps that you can do that. There are period apps where you can put in individual, like, hey, I feel very less energized today. And chances are that's going to correlate to your cycle of where your estrogen levels may be really high and your progesterone levels may be very low, or vice versa, because those do change daily. They actually change throughout the day. So I think that unpredictable hormone profile should be tracked. I think, and they really did a good job at highlighting how frequently they change. And then, when it comes to your energy requirements, this one is so individualized, right? Because you're talking about age, you're talking about performance, what you're eating, altitude, heat. This is just going to change regardless of female versus male. So that is something you have to work individually with your trainer, your dietitian, your physician, or just someone in the field that can kind of help you figure out how much do I need to be consuming and how does this change every day based on me as a female in my cycle. So I think they did a really good job at explaining that, because you mentioned REDs, right? Like if you're not consuming enough calories as a female, certain periods of time, you're more susceptible to, say, bone mineralization decrease, which can lead to stress fractures. I can say that because my husband, being an orthopedic surgeon, you hear females that are more higher risk for stress fractures due to REDs, right? And that really has a direct correlation on how much they're eating, whether it's on purpose or not on purpose. So they explain that in the paper pretty well too.
I love the fact that you said on purpose, right? Because it also the paper brings in not only some of the scientific studies, but also some of the environmental concerns, right? There's this whole, attitude among some athletes that they should be calorie deficient, when in reality, what they're doing requires more calories, and then you run into problems, right? So it's really taking this total picture and laying it out. Like there are scientific concerns, there are also environmental concerns, there are also attitudinal concerns, and here's what we say about all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. As a female, I mean, I have 2 little girls, and social media is an issue. I'm already seeing them take videos and photos and start to compare themselves to it, and it's like really sad. But it's like, this is the society we live in, right? So I think knowledge is power, and being able to have these conversations with young female athletes and just females in general. And I know this is a male issue too, so I don't want to disclude them because I know it touches everybody, but it really is important specifically for athletes because their performance and their health is dependent on how well their overall health is. And if this is a factor that's going to affect them as an athlete, it really needs to be addressed. So being able to explain, hey, you need to be consuming more carbohydrates because your energy is low, that can lead to an injury because you're not paying attention. You maybe have brain fog so being able to have someone walk you through that. And I think what's really exciting is I'm seeing more dietitians get in that high school space to teach these young athletes, hey, I know you want to be skinny, but that may not be good for your performance as an athlete or your health as a human being. So I love that this paper's out and it addresses so many things I mean, some of the other highlights, hydration, electrolyte balance, protein recommendations, what supplements are beneficial for females. I believe it was caffeine, iron, obviously, and creatine.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that they address that, because there are differences between males and females with supplements, and that's exactly why research is so important to include females. And I think we'll get into that later, but it's nice that they included that in the paper.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. As far as another question I have, as we look at the paper, you can read the paper, and then do you have any, how have you seen these position stands being used in practice, right? Like, so if you're a nutritionist, if you're a dietitian, even if you're a trainer in the gym who reads this, what's that interaction look like with clients? I mean, is there a practical way to put some of this knowledge to use, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. For myself in general, I work with a lot of family members that are older, whether they're in the post-menopause phase or in menopause, and they're struggling with weight gain. When you look at this paper, it really helps to break down the different phases and why they may be holding on to adipose tissue more, even though they've increased their performance, their activity levels, even though they've changed their diets. They've, included supplements to hopefully help with weight loss or weight maintenance. They're not seeing changes. So being able to read this paper as almost like a guideline with them to say, okay, let's track your hormones. Let's see where you're at. Let's see where your estrogen and progesterone levels are at. And let's see where we need to focus our attention on. So for me as a dietitian, whether I'm practicing or just with friends and family members, this is going to help me a lot to help them reach their goal. And I think for anyone who's in the space with athletes, again, it'll be like a reference guide, maybe a starting point. It may not be an all-inclusive, this is what we need to do, but at least it leads them to the right direction and they know where to go.
I completely agree with the recommendations that can come out of this paper in practice. But I also think that, as I read through, this could be a really important stand for continued research in some of these areas for the female athletes. So, we talked a lot about what's lacking in the research on female athletes and the different stages of a female's life. And I think, we look at the paper here and it looks at hydration and dehydration and protein metabolism and energy, right? So I think this could all be a great stand for what's next in the research, from this. I guess, what do you think about that? I know how passionate you are about the research and the science for female athletes, but do you think that some of this could be like a good base for that continued research in the field?
Yeah, that's a great point, Elise, because when you're reading through the paper, it will even say there's a lack of evidence here and it needs further research. And I think the paper even opens up talking about how, I believe it was in the mid 60s, there was an issue. They were recognizing that cardiovascular rates were actually lower because of estrogen levels being dropped after menopause. And they wanted to explore it further, right? So they recruited like 8,000 men for the study. And for me, as someone who's a researcher, I go, great hypothesis, probably a decent protocol and design, but who chose the demographic? Like, in what world would this work? Like,
Right. How did that get past any level?
how? And I think back and I go, well, it's the 60s, so it was men driven. I mean, even today, I think it's 30% is the average female researcher. So not having that female voice at that time to say, hey guys, like you're not going to see anything in this study because you're studying the wrong population, So throughout time, like, we're seeing more female researchers come in. And then when you take a paper like this that points out areas of interest that are lacking that research, it really does drive the question of where can we go from here to provide that knowledge to people. So then researchers like myself and a lot of the people that wrote this paper are researching currently. I know one person in particular does female research. So for her, she's involved in the creation of this paper. She may go back and say, hey, there's a piece here that we can contribute to society of researching further. So I'm going to actually touch base with her too, because I want to know, like, hey, did you see that section in the paper that's a supplement? This is right up her alley. It's a good avenue for her as a starting off point. But I agree, it's been frustrating to see a lot of females excluded in research due to contraceptions that they use, due to hormonal fluctuations, because in research we want to have consistent variables. We want to be able to eliminate any variables that may change what we're looking at. And unfortunately, because women have that dynamic, it could possibly change what we're looking at. So it's easier to have men as our population that we're studying. But as we've seen, you can't translate that information apples to women. There's restrictions there. So it really is important to have as close as 50-50 men, women in a study, if not 40-60,
For sure.
to be able to address these issues.
Yeah, and I also love how this paper like really hits so many different types of people in different industries, right? Like we talked about the researchers, we talked about, the healthcare practitioners, about recommendations, right? Well, it hits the ingredient research. Where is the continued ingredient research, whether it's protein or amino acids or carbohydrates on female athletes, right? And then it hits the manufacturers, right? Like what's next for innovation for female athletes, right? And for dietary supplements, for functional foods and beverages. And then it hits the consumer too, right? Like what's the demand that's coming from that female athlete on products, on ingredient innovation, on what they're demanding from their healthcare provider to recommend to them, right? So I love how it's kind of like a full circle, and it goes back to all these different people within the industry, within the sports nutrition industry. I find that just, pretty fascinating, to be honest.
And I think that's a direct correlation to who they chose to be the authors on the paper, because when you look at that list of people, I mean, I know probably 80% of them personally, and I can say they're doing research here. They work directly with athletes. Hey, they're in supplement. They're in the industry. That's cool. That brings a different perspective to the thing. So I agree. This paper really brings in different viewpoints, which is important because you want those voices to be heard. Because if you leave them out, you're leaving out a crucial piece that's important for someone somewhere that's reading this paper. So I agree. I think I don't know if Jose did the recruiting for this paper. There was probably a collective voice, but I think they did a good job in choosing who wrote it. Maybe next year they'll include me. I don't know.
I was going to say, maybe next time I'll see Katie Emerson on there and be like, I trust that girl.
Yeah, it's cool how they, I love the fact you're bringing all of those voices in, and your point about not excluding any part of that whole universe, around sports nutrition, whether it be, foods or supplements or whatever. Bringing that all together is so important, because after all, we're talking about whoever the end user is. If it's someone trying to get fit, someone who's like an elite athlete, whoever that is, they're one person, right? They do all of that. So it's crazy to just go down one lane and talk just about one thing versus the other, because I don't know, people that I see in the gym, they don't necessarily care. They care about being fit and doing the right thing, no matter where that comes from. So it's just a great, I guess what we're saying here is, the ISSN did a pretty damn good job on this. So congratulations to them.
I think we're all in agreement there.
Yeah, right. And speaking of them, we also just last week or so posted a video where our friend David Sandler went through one of their other position stands on energy drinks and shots. And that one's also kind of a deep dive into what those important points are, the market. And as Elise, you said, that one too points out all different aspects from, if you're a formulator, if you're a brand, if you're, a dietitian, whomever, you'll find some valuable information there. So you should check that one out on Move Nutrition.
Yeah, David is probably the best person you could have got to speak on that topic. So good job getting him. He was
hyped up. He was ready to go, which was so awesome. Like you could tell he was into this. He knew it. I mean, he had the formula. He had the can maker in his apartment.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. It was really insightful, and we can't wait to see what else ISSN is up to at their upcoming conference. I can't wait to see you speak at it, and we'll talk to you then.